Welcome. This chapter traces the history of Judah and Israel from 887 to 805 before the Common Era, a period marked by dynastic struggles, religious revival, and ongoing conflicts with neighboring powers. In Judah, Athaliah seized the throne, ruling for a brief but turbulent period. Her reign ended with the rise of the young Joash, who was proclaimed king by the priest Jehoiada, leading to Athaliah's death. This event sparked a religious revival, emphasizing loyalty to the traditional worship of Yahweh, and included significant repairs to the temple. After Jehoiada and his son died, Judah faced renewed threats, including invasions by Hazael of Aram. Joash's reign ended with his assassination, reflecting the continued vulnerability of the Judean monarchy. In Israel, kings such as Jehoash achieved military successes, including defeating the Arameans, while Amaziah of Judah conquered Edom but was later defeated by Jehoash of Israel. During this period, Elisha remained a significant religious figure until his death, influencing both kingdoms. The northern kingdom also saw the rise of Jeroboam II. Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab, seized control of Judah with a ruthless determination that surpassed even her mother's cruelty. She came to power following the death of her son Ahaziah, and immediately sought to eradicate every member of the house of David to secure her rule. Her ambition was not only political but religious. She desired to establish and spread the worship of Baal throughout Jerusalem and Judah, continuing the Phoenician idolatrous practices that her mother had introduced in Samaria. Reports suggest she ordered the massacre of all the surviving princes of David's family in Jerusalem. Yet one child, Joash, not yet 1 year old, was saved by the courageous intervention of Jehasheba, the daughter of King Jehoram of Judah and sister of the slain Ahaziah. She secretly concealed Joash and his nurse within the temple precincts, where the Levites, loyal to the ancient covenant, cared for him in secrecy. During this period, Athaliah ruled Judah with absolute authority, exercising control over both the political and religious spheres. The aristocratic families of Judah likely aligned themselves with her, while the high priest Jehoiada, bound by family ties and allegiance to the house of David, remained steadfast in his fidelity to the ancient teachings. Athaliah installed an image of Baal in Jerusalem, appointed a high priest named Mattan, and filled the temple with subordinate priests to serve the idol. Though she dared not place an image of Baal directly into Solomon's sanctuary on Mount Moriah, she prohibited its use for divine worship, effectively desecrating the sacred site. Mercenary troops from Caria, along with the royal bodyguard, were stationed in rotating shifts to guard the temple and suppress any opposition, maintaining Athaliah's oppressive control from 887 to 881 before the Common Era. Meanwhile, Jehoiada acted with careful strategy to safeguard the young prince and restore the rightful line of David. He cultivated secret alliances with the Carians and the temple guards, gradually revealing to them that a legitimate heir to the throne survived. By the time Joash had reached 7 years of age, Jehoiada judged that sufficient support had been secured to challenge Athaliah. On a Sabbath, when one division of Carian guards took their posts and two-thirds occupied the temple entrance, Jehoiada presented Joash to the chiefs, who recognized the boy as the legitimate heir, probably noting his resemblance to the royal family of David. The leaders swore allegiance to the young king, and plans for the restoration of the Davidic monarchy were set in motion. The soldiers were instructed to prevent any hostile intrusion into the temple courts, assuring that Joash would be protected until the moment of revolution. Thus, during the silent years of Athaliah's tyranny, the foundations for a religious revival and the return of the house of David were being carefully laid, with loyalty, secrecy, and strategy converging in the temple on Mount Moriah. As the young prince was now secure from every threat, the high priest Jehoiada allowed the people to enter the courts of the temple, at a moment charged with tension, when the Carians' mercenary soldiers from the island of Caria and the palace guard stood ready with drawn swords, and the chiefs of the city held the ancient weapons that had belonged to King David. Jehoiada led the child Joash from the hidden chamber where he had been concealed. With solemn precision, he placed the crown upon the boy's head, anointed him as king, and seated him upon the pillar-like throne that had been brought into the temple courts for the ceremony. Amid the blast of trumpets and the clash of arms, the people clapped their hands and cried aloud, "Long life King Joash!" The uproar reached the palace of Athaliah, the usurping queen and mother of the late King Ahaziah, rousing her from the false security she had felt, convinced of the loyalty of her mercenary troops. Rushing to the temple with only a few attendants, she was met with the shocking sight of a child crowned as king, protected by soldiers, and surrounded by a cheering crowd. Realizing her plot had been betrayed, she tore her clothes in despair and cried, "Conspiracy! Conspiracy!" Her own captains, some of the very men who had served her, seized her, led her by a winding path from the temple courts to the eastern gates of the palace, and executed her. In that single, decisive act, the last grandchild of the house of Omri met the same ignoble fate as her mother, Queen Jezebel. The close ties between Israel and Tyre had brought neither kingdom happiness. Jezebel and Athaliah had, like the goddess Astarte they revered, become symbols of destruction, death, and ruin. In her final moments, Athaliah found no allies in Jerusalem. The priests of Baal, powerless against the will of the people, perished alongside her, victims of the nation's righteous fury. Having orchestrated this decisive revolution, Jehoiada turned immediately to the consolidation of both religious and political authority. Using the enthusiasm of the young King Joash and the rejoicing populace, he moved to eradicate every trace of Baal worship. He demanded a solemn pledge from the king and the assembly that henceforth they would serve faithfully the God of Israel, abandoning all idols. The king and nation spoke the promise aloud, sealing it with a covenant. Then, with collective zeal, the inhabitants of Jerusalem entered the temple of Baal, which had been erected by Athaliah, destroying the altars, trampling the images, and annihilating all instruments of idol worship. The nation itself assumed responsibility for protecting its faith. Only after the covenant was ratified did Joash, escorted triumphantly by guards, soldiers, and the crowd, proceed from the Temple Mount to the palace, where he was enthroned. Jerusalem overflowed with joy. The remaining supporters of the fallen queen dared not interfere, intimidated by the mass enthusiasm of the people. Remarkably, throughout these rapid political and religious upheavals in Jerusalem and Samaria, the prophet Elisha, successor of Elijah, did not intervene directly. He had instructed one disciple to anoint Jehu as the instrument of vengeance against the crimes of Omri's house, but Elisha himself remained in the background. He did not engage with King Jehu, nor did he participate in the overthrow of Athaliah or the eradication of Baal worship in Jerusalem. Instead, he focused on instructing a circle of prophetic disciples, preserving the fervor Elijah had instilled. Yet Elisha, unlike his teacher, was not universally recognized as a leader. He was mocked by the sons of prophetic disciples at Bethel for not wearing long, flowing hair, earning the nickname bald head and implying a deviation from the Nazarite traditions. Elisha also diverged from Elijah in his approach to human society, seeking engagement with the people rather than remaining in solitude. During the reign of the Omride dynasty in Samaria, he resided on Mount Carmel but visited the prophetic schools and the territories along the Jordan River with his disciple Gehazi. Later, he made Samaria his permanent residence, becoming known as the prophet of Samaria. Through his approachable manner, he exerted lasting influence on those around him, advising men of note and receiving visitors on Sabbaths and new moons. In contrast, in the kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem, Elisha remained absent. The records offer no account of interactions there, suggesting either deliberate avoidance or that his efforts were redundant in the presence of the high priest Jehoiada. The violent, dramatic methods of Elijah and Elisha were not widely appreciated in Jerusalem, where attention was concentrated on the temple and the law under Jehoiada's vigilant guardianship. The temple itself had suffered under Athaliah. Its golden covering, which adorned the cedar walls, had been partially destroyed, and entire blocks had been violently removed. Repairing these damages became a priority for the young King Joash at the start of his reign. Jehoiada impressed upon him the necessity of undertaking this restoration, but the means were lacking. Whatever treasures had been accumulated in the temple offerings from former kings or pious donors had likely been transferred by Athaliah to the house of Baal, leaving the temple impoverished and in urgent need of renewal. King Joash of Judah, determined to restore the temple of the Lord, commanded the priests to collect money for the necessary repairs. He instructed them to undertake the work with the same zeal and diligence as though it were their own property. Each Aronite, a descendant of the family of Aaron appointed as priest, was to gather contributions from his acquaintances. Out of the sums collected, the expenses of repairing the temple were to be covered. For a long time, however, the repairs were delayed. Whether the funds were insufficient or misused by the priests, the work did not proceed. At last, the king directed the high priest Jehoiada, in the year 864 before the Common Era, to rally the nation's interest in the project. Jehoiada placed a chest with a slit in it within the courtyard of the temple, into which any person moved by piety or generosity could deposit a freewill offering according to his means. Contributions could also be given to the priests, who would then place them in the chest. The gifts proved generous and sufficient to procure building materials and pay masons and carpenters. Jehoiada elevated the status of the high priest, which until that time, even under the most virtuous kings, had been subordinate to royal authority. He had saved the kingdom from destruction and rescued the last descendant of the house of David from the murderous Queen Athaliah. From that moment, the high priest could justly claim a significant voice in state affairs. Jehoiada used his influence to ensure respect for the law and to prevent a recurrence of the apostasy that had threatened Judah. As long as Jehoiada lived, no conflict arose between the royal authority and the priesthood, as King Joash submitted to the high priest's guidance, motivated by gratitude and respect. When Jehoiada died, King Joash honored him with burial in the royal mausoleum in the city of David. After Jehoiada's death, however, strife erupted between his son and successor, Zechariah, and King Joash. Although the precise details are lost to history, it is recorded that by the king's command, some princes of Judah stoned Zechariah in the temple courts. In his dying moments, the young high priest cried out, "May God take account of this and avenge it." In other respects, the overthrow of the house of Omri, which had caused so many quarrels in Samaria and Jerusalem, brought internal peace to both kingdoms. The situation was tolerable, though private altars remained in Judah, and in the kingdom of the 10 tribes, the God of Israel was still worshipped in the form of a bull. The worship of Baal had been expelled from both lands. Externally, however, both kingdoms suffered at the hands of enemies. Jehu, the bold chief of horsemen who had destroyed the house of Omri in Jezreel and Samaria, did not confront powerful foreign adversaries with the same vigor. Hazael, the Aramean regicide and king of Aram Damascus, daring in military operations and eager for conquest, attacked Israel with ruthless efficiency. His forces captured fortified towns, burned houses, and spared neither children nor women. Hazael conquered the territories on the eastern side of the Jordan River, seizing the entire districts of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, stretching from the mountains of Bashan to the Arnon River. Many inhabitants perished under iron plowshares, while the survivors were reduced to a state of semi-bondage. Jehu was unable to resist Hazael's assaults, perhaps because he also faced opposition from the king of Tyre, whose relatives and allies Jehu had previously slain. Under Jehu's son, Jehoahaz, reigning from 859 to 845 before the Common Era, the situation deteriorated further. The Israelites had been weakened by constant Aramean attacks, leaving only 10,000 infantry, 50 horse soldiers, and 10 war chariots available for defense. The Arameans made repeated incursions, looting towns and taking captives to sell as slaves. Jehoahaz appears to have concluded a humiliating peace with Hazael, granting his troops free passage through Israelite lands. Hazael then overran the territory of the Philistines and captured the town of Gath. He advanced against Jerusalem, but King Joash of Judah submitted without a fight, purchasing peace. This apparent cowardice provoked discontent among the nobles, and 2 men, Joskar and Jehozabad, conspired against the king and killed him in the house where he was staying. Finally, Joash, king of Israel, reigning from 845 to 830 before the Common Era, gradually reduced the dominance of the Aramean kingdom. Neighboring kings, including the rulers of the Hittites on the Euphrates River and the king of Egypt, hostile to Damascus, opposed Ben-Hadad III. Ben-Hadad Roman III laid siege to the Israelite capital of Samaria with relentless determination. The famine that followed was so severe that the head of the donkey was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a load of dung for fuel cost 5 shekels. The war horses were decimated, so emaciated that few could serve in battle. The famine drove 2 women to the extreme horror, plotting to kill and eat their own children, a testament to the desperation and suffering inflicted by the siege. The Arameans, unexpectedly abandoning their siege, fled in haste, leaving behind their tents, horses, asses, valuables, and provisions. Word of this surprising retreat was brought to King Jehoash of Israel by a group of half-starved lepers, whose discovery renewed the king's courage and resolve. Emboldened, he engaged Ben-Hadad, the king of Damascus, in 3 separate battles, and in each engagement Jehoash emerged victorious. Defeated and humbled, Ben-Hadad of Damascus was forced to make peace and to restore the towns that his father, Hazael, had seized from the territories of the 10 tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan River. The weakening of the Syrian kingdom of Damascus had far-reaching effects for the fortunes of Judah under King Amaziah, who reigned from 843 to 816 before the Common Era. Damascus had previously extended protection to the smaller states of Moab, Ammon, and Edom, all of which maintained hostile relations with both Israel and Judah. Ben-Hadad's humiliation freed Amaziah to act decisively, allowing him to reconquer lands formerly belonging to the house of David. The small territory of Edom had shaken off vassalage approximately 50 years earlier. One of its kings had established a new capital atop the mountains of Seir, built upon chalk and porphyry rock, reaching 4,000 feet above sea level. A pathway wound up from the valley below to the mountain city, known to posterity as Petra, 15 miles south of the Dead Sea. The Idumeans believed themselves secure from all attacks, boasting, "Who shall bring me down to the ground?" Amaziah, undeterred by the lofty position, led his army against the Edomites in their mountain stronghold. A battle ensued in the Salt Valley, not far from the Dead Sea, where Amaziah inflicted great destruction upon the enemy. The survivors fled, leaving their fortress exposed. Having captured it, Amaziah, for reasons unknown, renamed the city Jokthel, after a Judean town. Likely, enormous booty accompanied this triumph, for Edom was rich in flocks and metals alike. Amaziah's pride swelled with this victory, but it would also sow the seeds of his future downfall and the misfortune of his people. A lasting understanding had existed between King Jehu of Israel and his successors in the kingdom of Judah. Though no formal alliance comparable to that between the Omride dynasty and King Jehoshaphat of Judah was established, both kingdoms shared a common interest in restraining the adherence of Baal worship. Both kings, Jehoash of Israel and Amaziah of Judah, remained devoted to the ancient law. When executing justice for the murder of his father, Amaziah displayed unusual leniency by sparing the sons of the culprits, contrary to the brutal customs of the time. It is likely that the high priest or another representative of the law had reminded him that the religion of Israel forbade inflicting suffering upon children for the sins of their fathers or upon fathers for the sins of their children. In Israel, King Jehoash held the prophet Elisha, who had labored for over 50 years, from 900 to 840 before the Common Era, in deep respect. He followed Elisha's counsel in all matters of consequence. As the prophet lay on his deathbed, the king visited him, lamenting his imminent passing, calling him the father and guardian of Israel. After Elisha's death, Jehoash commanded Gehazi, Elisha's devoted attendant, to recount all the prophet's important deeds. When the Shunammite woman, previously aided by Elisha, appeared before the king to reclaim her house and field from an unlawful occupier, her appeal was granted immediately. The mere association of Elisha with her cause sufficed to sway the king's judgment. Elisha's influence extended even beyond Israel. A prominent Aramean general, Naaman, second only to the king of Damascus in rank, renounced the worship of Baal and Astarte and acknowledged the God of Israel. So profound was his reverence that he brought earth from Israel to Damascus to erect a private altar, symbolically consecrating it with holy soil. Despite shared ambitions to maintain independence from foreign powers, internal divisions between Judah and Israel had grown too deep to allow a unified path. Upon returning from his conquest of Edom, Amaziah conceived a bold plan to march against the kingdom of the 10 tribes, intending to reconquer it. As a pretext, he requested the daughter of the king of Israel as a bride for his son, expecting that refusal would justify war. Jehoash replied with sharp satire, "The thorn bush once said to the cedar of Lebanon, 'Give thy daughter as a wife to my son.' And the wild beasts of Lebanon came forth and trampled the thorn bush. Because thou hast conquered Edom, thy heart grows proud. Guard thine honor, and remain at home. Why wilt thou plunge thyself into misfortune, that Judah may fall with thee?" Amaziah refused to yield. He sent his army to the borders of Israel, where Jehoash, encouraged by his recent victories over the Arameans, advanced to meet him. The two forces clashed at Beth-Shemesh, and the men of Judah suffered a crushing defeat, fleeing the battlefield. Amaziah himself was captured by the king of Israel. Remarkably, Jehoash displayed unusual restraint. Though he had defeated Judah decisively, he did not depose Amaziah, nor did he attempt to annihilate the house of David or merge the kingdom of Judah with his own realm. Instead, he limited his actions to the destruction of the walls of Jerusalem and to the ransacking of the town, the royal palace, and the temple, leaving the king and the dynasty intact but humiliated.